Pomophobia by Mark Fisher and Robin Mackay from CCRU's Abstract Culture Swarm Number 1. This text from CCRU.net. Watch yourself. There is always a camera hidden somewhere. 1996, London. This is art. As cut-up Super 8 reels of Stalin's funeral flicker on the white walls, Donna Summer's I Feel Love plays on the sound system, overdubbed by blasts of spoken word Adorno text. In another part of the room, slides of old people on holiday flick by. Cultural detritus, discovered in junk shops and church fetes, forming a jaded carnival of negative authenticity. A joyless juxtafest where found objects recline passively, waiting for your listless stare to turn their way. The scene could have almost been set up to illustrate Baudrillard's weary polemic. Any object, any individual, any situation today could be a virtual ready-made. The ready-made, Baudrillard writes, extracted from its context, from its idea, from its function, becomes more real than real, hyper-real, and more art than art. It enters into the trans-aesthetics of banality, of insignificance, of nullity, where today the pure and indifferent form of art is to be seen. Your body feels unbearably heavy. Your head turns lethargically to each exhibit in turn, and then begins again. You feel the same ennui you would get reading and rereading old magazines in a waiting room. Then remember, horrified, there is nothing to wait for. This is the event. A dreadful self-consciousness pervades the whole scene. People carefully and consciously perform the actions that they would have made were they dancing, were they enjoying themselves, carefully simulating and being seen to be simulating all the gestures of carefree pleasure, as if sim life lip-syncing to kitsch classics, moving with the confident self-consciousness of photographic models. Jacques your body. We have swallowed our microphones and headsets. We have interiorized our own prosthetic image and become the professional showmen of our own lives. No more actions save those that result from an interaction, complete, if possible, with television and built-in feedback. Sim panopticon. And you're always on stage, circuiting everything through the auto monitor, showing a series of reruns and sim programs in your place while you theorize yourself into existence. As if you're wise enough to know it's impossible to do anything, following commands from the auto monitor. Disclaim your body immediately. Abandon your desiring machines, all ye who enter here. Everything has already been screened, circuited through the auto monitor. This psychic appendage capable of unlimited metabolization. Auto-monitoring Pomo is a machine, but it arrives like lightning, sweeping away any evidence of its origins as instantaneously as it establishes its miraculous reign as prime cause of everything. Imminent to its workings is a suppressive intensity behind the screens of representation, epistemology, and signification. It's either meaningful or meaningless. In any case, it's saturated with significance. Before anything gets through security, it has to check in with the Jacques officers. You have to ask it means to do something rather than just doing it. The Pomo machinery will convert any input into a signifying formula. Whenever anything is working, it will ask, what does it mean? What is it? There's nothing outside the text, because nothing gets in unless it's already been textualized, completed with brackets and quotation marks, converted into cannon fodder. There's a degree of sleeplessness, of rumination, of the historical sense, Nietzsche wrote in Untimely Meditations, which is harmful and ultimately fatal to the living thing, whether this living thing be a man or a people or a culture. His scattered accounts of this infinite and infinitely frightful boundless ocean forewarn of the throbbing, inescapable ache of irony, knowing self-mockery, the interminable stepping in and out of cultural idiom, which we might recognize as popular postmodern culture. He concludes, the oversaturation of an age with history seems to me to be hostile and dangerous to life. It leads an age into a dangerous mode of irony in regard to itself, and subsequently into the even more dangerous mode of cynicism. But surely the only danger here is that of a comprehensive neutralization. The second-hand miming of irrelevant destruction and willful squandering of energy. Playing in the ruins, then, is our game. A desultory and arbitrary sorting through the mass of valueless junk left at our disposal. Some take a certain glee in this abject practice. A fervor for revival, citation, surreal juxtaposition, and all other characteristic tropes of popular postmodernism. However, this is what Nietzsche describes as pessimism and decline, as growing effeteness, as a sort of cosmopolitan fingering, as tout comprendre, and historicism. The cardinal features of Pomo, the arbitrary aesthetics, the simulated gestures, the boredom, the poignancy of the lost object, combine to produce a transcendental miserablism, a deep sense not only that there is nothing to be done, but that nothing could ever have been done. Zarathustra's ultimate man, inexterminable as the flea, says irony and blinks. They are clever and know everything that has ever happened, so there is no end to their mockery. 1991. No future. U.S. reprise. Punk arrives in America. Nirvana on MTV. Smells Like Teen Spirit begins as if on Jupiter, or body weight has hideously increased. The music pressed down by fatigue, lassitude, why bother? Never mind. As Cobain says to Kill a Line. What Cobain's weighed down by above all is a dead heaviness of the past, the overwhelming sense that everything has already been done. When Kurt Cobain first heard the punk records that would excite and inspire him, they were already old news, the fading afterglow of long-extinct stars. He lived, he always knew, in the era culture interregnum that Jameson, referring to an ostensibly very different cultural sphere, called a world in which stylistic innovation is no longer possible, where all that is left is to imitate dead styles, to speak through the masks, and with the voices of the styles in the imaginary museum. But this means that contemporary or postmodernist art is going to be about art itself in a new kind of way. Even more, it means that one of its essential messages will involve the necessary failure of art and the aesthetic, the failure of the new, the imprisonment in the past. No future had a gleeful edge when Rotten sang it, a sense not only of being relieved of an obligation to the future, but of being free from a responsibility to the past. But from where Slacker was, Rotten's sneer, even McLaren's demystifying Svengali strategies, looked as nostalgic as a silver jubilee they supposedly opposed. With a Xerox revolution of punk emerged in the wreckage of disciplinary societies, as an escape from the dreary treadmill of school and dead-end jobs, Slacker was in a controlled loop from the start. Its every move anticipated, tracked, bought, and sold before it had even happened. Cobain knows that he's just another piece of the spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV. Knows that his every move is a cliché, scripted in advance. Knows that even realizing it is a cliché. This epistemological spiral may seem like a runaway ride, but at escape velocity, it simply goes into a cold orbit, processing everything through the auto monitor. The result is a dreadful physical paralysis. Words take a long time to emerge from this gravity, from Cobain's hoarse, seemingly shredded throat. It might be months on the radio or MTV before you begin to catch what's being said in Nirvana's songs. Sell the kids for food. I don't mind if I don't have a mind. I feel stupid and contagious. I'm neutered and spayed. At the end of the rainbow and your rope. I don't care if it's old. But the feeling of humiliation, disintegration, or defeat by some distant malevolence is what the music says by itself. It's Baudrillard, who is the consummate philosopher of Slacker and its correlative physical state, the lethargic, couch potato impotence, the effectless, dope tension-free, the terminally defeated. One day, the image of a person watching a television screen voided by a technician's strike will be seen as the perfect epitome of the anthropological reality of the 20th century. Metaforensic analysis screens events before they happen. They arrive prepackaged and pre-filed as niche commodities. Tragedy, massacre, political condemnation, all-party talks mediamatically pattern recognized. The extirpation of contingency going hand in hand with the proliferation of categories, vocabulary. The significatory categories have to be established before anything is allowed to happen. When Baudrillard says the Gulf War didn't happen, it's because, on the terminal beaches of Pomo, nothing happens anymore. Events belong to the past. All that's left are commemorations, anniversaries, revivals, remakes, remodels. Events are precisely that which could have happened differently. The Gulf War, meanwhile, had the scripted inevitability of a TV program, a carefully designed real-time apocalypse scenario that unfolded as it was broadcast, in an uninterrupted and uninterruptible telepresent simultaneity, which is why the Gulf War played the same symbolic role for slacker that Vietnam did for the 60s. Generation X is always out of time. Arriving after the orgy, it found itself exiled from the progressivist aspirations of the 60s counterculture and thrown to the seamless temporality of MTV, a temporality Jameson, writing just as MTV was just beginning to broadcast, was already describing when he wrote of the disappearance of a sense of history. The way in which our entire contemporary social system has, little by little, begun to lose its capacity to retain its own past, has begun to live in a perpetual present and in a perpetual change. But this simultaneous perpetual present is nothing but the endless reiteration of the past, the airless no time of the classic, a timeless eternality removed from history, because it's bereft of any sense of contingency. So while the postmodern scene is obsessed with the past, it is only historicist in the way that Nietzsche's cosmopolitan fingers are. What Jameson has called the nostalgia mode is characterized by an atemporal mix ion-match aesthetic that has moved beyond the model of linear development on which historical narrative is premised. That constantly recurring feature of the postmodern scene, the ironically revived text, is a complex object in which on some level children and adolescents can take the adventure straight, while the adult public is able to gratify a deep and more properly nostalgic desire to return to that older period and to live its strange old artifacts through once again. A deep cynicism lies hidden behind an apparent generosity. Britpop may just be a reheated version of the past, but it is new to the kids, giving them a chance to experience what they missed. The revived artifact emerges as doubly transcendent, offering a transcendence not only the present, from which it seeks to escape into a supposedly more coherent past, but also the very past it affects to fetishize, since ironic distance and a little modification here and there allow us to enjoy the past without the embarrassment of being actually immersed in it. Britpop is only one example of the British version of Pomo, which, if anything, is both more cynical and more wistful than its American variant. The interlocking milieu of late-night TV, retro pop, and graduate comedy, protected by a demystificatory barrier that ensures it won't get fooled again, languishes in the citational abyss of an increasingly fiction-free revivalism. We look at the old days with a certain pity, a certain tenderness, and a great condescension. They are what we can never be, unconscious of the great weight of their existence, unembarrassed, whilst we can only simulate, enthralled to the authority of an absent authenticity, slave to a dead god. Enkishment, or ironical reinvestment, is invariably followed by a sneer at the reconstructed naivete which is, however, cherished, despite its apparent embarrassed acquiescence at the hands of Pomo cynicism. A superficial glee, accompanied by a nostalgic sigh. If only we could go back to those simpler times, watching Bagpuss in our nylon Starsky and Hutch t-shirts. The miserable relativism of Pomo is already invited by the inherent pathos of Kant's metaphysics, backed by the barely disguised theocide of rationally enforced regulative principles and transcendental simulations, the as-if. As the ground falls away, you have to learn to police yourself. The transcendental as a generalized apparatus of capture, locking intelligence into closed circuits, simultaneously produces and fulfills impoverished expectations. The repressive force of this machine can only be gauged by the absurd amount of energy expended upon its maintenance. Pomo's transcendental miserabilism, a last cubbyhole of humanity amidst the swarm-machinic rhizome of techno-capital, domicile where once was domain, purposiveness without purpose, constitutes a multi-story as if, where only a residual conceit secures homeostasis. Fiercely protected, Pomo is all about cults, clubs, and cliques. Nothing gets in without prior inoculation. The shocks of this system come from the dark side, from the unanticipated and unprepared for. What is genuinely new will evade the pre-scripted categories, the new Beatles, the new punk, which have already neutralized any possible deviation from the already processed. Techno-capital, as generalized decoding machine, is the basis of a numerical or synthetic culture whose ability to break down, display, and replicate code into asignifying machinic elements within virtual systems puts it on a line of flight away from all signifying language, unleashing a generalized decoding which irradiates the whole culture. While decoding doubtless means understanding and translating a code, it also means destroying the code as such, assigning it an archaic, folkloric, or residual function. Capitalism displays antithetical tendencies, tenaciously reaffirming redundant cultural forms with one hand, while ruthlessly decommissioning them with the other. Bourgeois tragic culture revels in a retro-reactive fascination for these archaisms, kitsch, building them back into the system at the level of ironic simulation, which further strengthens the reproduction of a self-satisfied human interiority under the great weight of its own poignant degeneration. But regardless of chronological priority, simulation is always secondary to and derivative of synthetics. The arbitrariness of transcendental SimStim regulations does not itself necessitate the reification and metaforensic examination of this lack of a ground, which itself serves as the basis of transcendental miserabilist aesthetics, philosophy, and theory. This is more the product of the already existing bourgeois culture and its decadent tendency to translate its own petty problems into grand gestures. Fed on the endlessly regurgitated brains of dead philosophers, post-structuralism degenerates into the spongiform Hegelianism it always already was, proudly dwelling on its own desolate but strictly delimited ground, while barely concealing its delight that we can't escape from the narratives of modernity. Theory remains tethered to the post, given over to the indeterminable rumination on what is superseded, but supposedly never overcome. All texts are pre-texts, also post-texts. Flimsy tracing papers colonially irrigated and preemptively captured by reassuringly dull, appropriately academic subtitles. Pun, verb, definite article, academic designation. Jocking off, offing jock. Dare de Lacan, and the self-referentiality of the academic subject. Rapid response is rendered impossible. The danger of embarrassing oneself by saying something that has not been rigorously auto-monitored, ruminated over for a punitively extended period of scholarly detention, is too great. Nietzsche's critique of the clogged digestive system of the West's last men, itself often perversely interpreted as a metaphor, expresses all too acutely the constipated urocontinence of these constricted bodies, themselves minor vascular elements of a resonant system of transcendental miserabilism disseminated across all levels of culture. The jury textocratic dribblings of post-theory are merely the transcendental idealist counterpoint to the empirical realism of postmodern culture. Kurt Cobain embodied what theory disembodies, the raging stomach pains which plagued him finding their disintensified correlate in the chin-rubbing, brow-furrowing protocols of urbane academic anxiety, smells like Hegelian spirit. By contrast, synthetic culture disorganizes the docilizing regimes of disciplinary body politics. Hip-hop and jungle work on the body, not in the overlit, luminotopological epistemoscapes of necrospective mummification, but in the dark zones where you don't have a chance to think about what things would mean before they happen. Effects arrive before objects, scrambling the operating system of the auto-monitoring signifying apparatus. Samploid music in video games emerges as the leading probe heads of synthetic culture precisely because their overt machinism, their asignifying functionality, their indifference to epistemological conundra brewed up in the depths of the strata. There is nothing to believe in. only a cyber-positive circuit to plug your body into. The A signifying codes of synthetic culture are not at all to be identified with a great inarticulable deferred transcendental object, blearily hallucinated by senescent Bavarian Catholicism and lingua francophony neo-communitarian desiccated Judaism in their post-theoretical guises. Materially functional numerical systems, these codes represent nothing, but are real parts of abstract machines, hooking up desiring machines by way of a continually complexifying axiomatic. What is dissolved in synthetic culture is not commodification per se, but commodity fetishism, as it regulates a bourgeois object system, in which everything is assigned a proper place. Synthetic culture sheds no Benjaminite tears for the lost aura of objects in the age of mechanical reproduction, celebrating instead the way in which the subject-object dichotomy and its attendant pathos are reconfigured as machinic circuits in the age of cybernetic replication. The trans-aesthetics of banality plays upon the poignant, if pathetic, aura of found objects, but for abstract culture, everything that's ready-made or mass-marketed is there to be dismantled and relocated into the unfamiliar architectures of synthetic composition, the uncanny adjacencies of the hip-hop or jungle track, where they have a machinic rather than merely a citational role to play, decomposable elements on a plane of consistency, not cut-up fragments. To the jaded eyes of the pomophile, sampling can appear to be part of its own aesthetic of incongruent bricolage. Yet another example of the crippling self-consciousness bedeviling a culture so exhausted it is fit only to sort through its own entrails. But, far from being imprisoned in the past, synthetic culture unlocks the machinic surplus value in the already actualized, stretching and warping time into non-organically reprogrammed somatic circuits of inhuman speeds and slownesses. A breath of fresh air, a little relation to the outside. That's all schizoanalysis asks. It's a matter of synaptic connectivity, crashing the Kantian mainframe, burning the cranial arboretum, switching on desiring machines.